First of all, I just want to clarify that I'm not dead. I know it's been a while. The truth is, I wrote the script for this video, sat down and filmed it, started to edit it, and I realised that I absolutely hated it. The perfectionist in me started to take over, and here is the reason why. Understanding Guy and Edna Ballard and the I Am activity is, in my opinion, crucial to understanding so much of the New Age movement.
Where you shall brace up your spine and take the scepter in your hand and be the master of yourself and your world.
While you can trace almost everything back to Helena Blavatsky in some weird way, it was the Ballards that formed the first real theosophy offshoot, and some even call them the creators of the first ever UFO religion. The Ballards themselves inspired offshoot groups like Elizabeth Prophet's Church Universal and Triumphant.
I am preborn, and I shall remain preborn, and I shall not be enslaved by any foe within or without.
And their influence can be seen in some of the strangest places.
We are freeborn, and we shall remain freeborn, and we shall not be enslaved by any foe, within or without.
But how did two seemingly ordinary people become the accredited messengers of Ascended Master St Germain, and later claim to have become Ascended Masters themselves? Let's find out, and it's gonna be a long one. On July 28, 1878, Guy Warren Ballard was born in Newtown, Kansas. His early life is elusive. Like a lot of these characters, it's hard to discern the truth from the bullshit. But we do know that he became a mining engineer, apparently having a bit of a soft spot for all things sparkling and decadent from a young age. People claim he used to dream about buried treasure and gold, all of that kind of stuff, but I'm not sure how much of that is just kind of like the mythology that's built up around him over the years. He did sell stocks in gold mines, and he borrowed a lot of money from people to fund his own addiction to mining for gold, and we'll get onto that later. He met his wife Edna Wheeler when she was playing the harp in her studio, and they married in 1916. It's said that his eyes were drawn to the glimmering golden harp that she was playing, like he's a bloody magpie. Edna gave birth to their son Donald Ballard in 1918, and soon both her and Guy were getting drawn into the world of the occult. It's rumoured that Guy worked as a spiritual medium and studied hypnotism, and again, it's important to remember that this kind of stuff was all over the news back in the day. The New York Times published their famous piece on Edgar Cayce in 1910, and Guy is a bit of a grifter. I feel like grifter is too kind, but we're still at the beginning of this story, so I'll go easy with the criticism up front. Edna worked in an occult bookstore run by her sister called the Philosopher's Nook. She also edited a newsletter called American Occultists and wrote about what she called the diamond self. This was the God self in each of us. This idea that we're all connected to God. We just need to find a way to tap into the lines of communication. While Edna was writing her esoteric manifestos, Guy was selling stocks in shitty mines. I can't put it any nicer way. He basically knew that these mines were either fake or they had no gold in them. And in 1929, he was indicted in Chicago on charges of obtaining money and goods by means of the confidence game. That's basically an old-timey way of saying the man was an absolute scam artist. Obtaining money and goods by means of the confidence game. See? That's my 1920s accent. I'm going to use it a lot. He was never arrested because he decided to flee the state, heading for California, where he would later write that he was doing government business. I guess that's another old-timey way of saying I'm on the lam. Listen here, see? I'm on the lam. I warned you, this accent, it just comes out of me. It was the beginning of the Great Depression and times were hard. People were drawn to spiritual gurus and those that sold a form of salvation, a promise that life could and would be better. For example, at the end of the Depression, Mary Baker Eddy's Christian Science hit its peak at around 2 million members. The New Thought movement was incredibly popular, and writers like Napoleon Hill were busy publishing books like The Law of Success, which taught that anybody could become successful, that it was a matter of mastering the self, curing the mind of those pesky negative thoughts.
A positive mental attitude can clear away all obstacles which stand between you and your major purpose in life.
The words law of attraction first appeared in Helena Blavatsky's Isis Unveiled, and this was the world that Guy and Edna Ballard were immersed in. Theosophy, Christian esotericism, Rosicrucianism, New Thought and the occult. They lapped it up like thirsty mules. So what happened next wasn't exactly surprising. In California, on his secret government business that just so happened to coincide with him running away from legal difficulties, Guy Ballard decided to settle at the foot of Mount Shasta, a dormant volcano that has been the place of spiritual importance for many indigenous American tribes, and it's also home to an incredibly sensitive ecosystem. In recent years, it's been co-opted by mostly white New Agers desperately seeking spirituality.
You know, you shouldn't be laying on the grass. It's really sensitive right now.
Not laying on it, I'm sitting on it.
Well, even sitting on it is hurting the grass.
I'll leave it sitting.
Where I've been coming for almost 30 years and praying for
You know
peace
how
here.
my people have been coming here thousands of years.
Great.
And
Hopefully they're experiencing the beauty of nature.
Do you know it takes that bush right there? It takes 50 years for it to mature. 50 years for it to get big enough to have flowers.
So how long are you going to sit here and bother me so I can get back to my meditations?
I want you to go out there because you're here bothering me.
We're not bothering You're bothering
us. We're descendants of this meadow.
You're bothering our sacred area.
Okay. So you're going to carry me out?
Sure will.
When I'm done.
Oh, no.
Honestly, watching that clip fills me with a sense of rage that I cannot even describe. It's just the absolute audacity of people, and it knows no bounds. And it's a perfect example of New Age spirituality. Sacred land treated as a commodity, and so-called spiritual people that are completely obsessed with the self, with zero recognition that they're trampling across land that never belonged to them in the first place. Praying for world peace while stomping on sensitive ecosystems while the people who the land actually belongs to beg you to stop.
You guys know about planetary liberation?
While the spiritual importance of Mount Shasta to indigenous Americans stretches back thousands of years, it was the 19th century that brought the snow-capped volcano to the attention of the theosophists and the Rosicrucians. One book can be credited with starting much of the modern mythology around Mount Shasta. It's called A Dweller on Two Planets, and it was written by a local man named Frederick Spencer Oliver. Although, according to Frederick, the real author was a spirit from the lost continent of Lemuria named Thylos the Thebetan. The book connects Helena Blavatsky's hidden brotherhood of masters to Mount Shasta itself, and it also explicitly references I Am, but we'll get onto that. When it was released, it caught the attention of an astronomer named Edgar Lucian Larkin, who wrote an article for the San Francisco Examiner in 1913 titled The Atlantides, where he references Oliver's book. Then, in 1925, a writer named Salvius published an article titled Descendants of Lemuria in the Mystic Triangle, which was the magazine of modern Rosicrucian philosophy, and it was published by Harvey Spencer Lewis, the head of the ancient mystical order Rosicrucius. The article asserts that there is a village inside of Mount Shasta where the last descendants of the Lemurians live. That village, or a city as some call it, would later become known as Telos. The article also alludes to strange sightings on the mountain and claims that Edgar Lucian Larkin had written that he himself had seen the Lemurian village via a telescope, but there is no record of him ever writing that. That's not to say that he didn't, I'm just saying I'm not sure if I trust Salvius. They haven't even got a last name. Salvius, more like Salvisus. I'm sorry, that was terrible. Awful joke, let's move on. Harvey Spencer Lewis went on to write his own book titled Lemuria, the Lost Continent of the Pacific, which he dedicated to Sir Francis Bacon for reasons that will become apparent. Some speculate as to whether Salvius was indeed Harvey Spencer Lewis himself, and the book is widely believed to have made the Mount Shasta and Lemuria story popular. All of this could have been why Guy Ballard himself was drawn to Mount Shasta, or it could have been the legend of J.C. Brown, a supposed prospector that claimed to have found an underground village in Shasta in 1902. 1404 that was filled with gold. Whether or not it was the promise of riches or ancient mystical knowledge, Shasta is where Guy claimed to be in the early 1930s, and he was clearly familiar with the lore around the volcano, writing in his later published book Unveiled Mysteries that rumours said there was a group of men, divine men in fact, called the Brotherhood of Mount Shasta, who formed a branch of the Great White Lodge. And just by chance, Guy Ballard was to have his own strange experience with this divine brotherhood. According to the book Unveiled Mysteries, Guy was casually hiking on Mount Shasta when he stopped at a spring for water. When he bent down to fill up his cup, he claimed that an electrical current passed through his body, and that when he turned around, a strange-looking young man was standing behind him. The stranger started chatting to him and said that if Guy gave him his cup, he would give him a much more refreshing drink than just plain old spring water. Guy didn't want to be rude, so he was like, all right, fine. And he said that his cup was filled with creamy liquid. Please God, get your mind out of the gutter. This is a respectable channel, right? Sicko. The stranger said, why don't you have a little sip, Guy? You know, Guy's a bit of an adventurer, and he said that it tasted delicious. I bet it did. Now, I bet you're wondering, who's this bloody bloke on the mountain who's passing out cups full of cream? Well, it was none other than Master St Germain. Now, that name might sound familiar to you if you've watched my video on Helena Blavatsky or the one I did about Love Has Won. But for those of you not in the know, let's do a quick refresher. The Comte de St Germain was widely thought of as being an adventurer, gallivanting around, performing with orchestras, and dubbed by Voltaire as the Wonder Man. He told tall tales on his travels, and he gained a mystical reputation, although some believed that he was working for intelligence agencies. And he was also rumoured to have had access to an elixir of life. Blavatsky herself claimed that members of her family had actually met Saint Germain, but most of the theories surrounding his existence were formed after her death. Some of Saint Germain's previous incarnations, according to the theosophists, include a high priest in Atlantis, Merlin, and Christopher Columbus. I wouldn't go around telling anybody that if I was him. I'd keep that one stum. You don't want to be telling people that.
No, I didn't meet the guy myself, but I don't like the story.
And some claim that he was Sir Francis Bacon, the man who some believe to be the author of the anonymous manifestos published in the 1600s that became the backbone of the Rosicrucian movement. And remember, Harvey Spencer Lewis, the head of the largest Rosicrucian organisation, the AMORC, dedicated his book on Lemuria to Sir Francis Bacon, the believed author of the Rosicrucian manifestos and potentially St Germain himself. Neo-theosophists like C.W. Leadbeater expanded on Blavatsky's work, and in his 1925 book The Master and the Path, he describes how Master St Germain is the seventh Chohan of the seventh ray. You can think of the Chohans as angels, but some describe them as lords or just plain old masters. According to theosophists, there are 7 Chohans that oversee the 7 rays, each ray representing a different type of energy, and Master St Germain watches over the 7th ray, which represents organisation and ceremonial magic. Each ray has a colour that correlates to it, and the 7th ray is represented by purple and silver, which is why in most images of St Germain you'll see him wearing purple. Each astrological age is overseen by a specific ray, and the age of Aquarius, which depending on who you talk to has either already started or is on the way, is overseen by the 7th ray and thus St Germain. There is absolutely no doubt that Guy and Edna Ballard were familiar with books like The Master and the Path, as well as other occult literature like Will Garver's Brother of the Third Degree. It was released in 1894, and it was about a man named Alfonso who was born into a family that was connected to the Masters. Saint Germain features in it, and in the story they're trying to set up a United States of Europe, and Alfonso is doing government business, much like Guy Ballard. It's almost as if Guy and Edna have spent a lot of their time in an occult bookstore, soaking up all of this mysterious writing. But anyway, we're on Mount Shasta, and St Germain starts letting it all spill out. He basically explains that he makes his body take on the characteristics and dress of the nations in which he works, which kind of sounds like he's an etheric spy. He's just like moving from place to place undercover. He says, and this is a direct quote, "We, Guy, in the ascended state, can control the atomic structure of our world, as a potter controls his clay. Every electron and atom in the universe is obedient to our desire and command, because of the God power by which we control it, and of which we have earned the right to be the directors. After dropping that zinger, St Germain takes Guy on a whirlwind tour of his past lives, and in all of these lives he was surrounded by people in his current life. So when he was in Egypt as an assistant priest, the high priest was actually his son Donald, and his wife Edna was a Vestal Virgin guarding the sacred fire. Saint Germain started chatting mad shit, saying that there was only one way to avoid the cosmic wheel of cause and effect. We must comprehend the law of life. Typically vague, but essentially old Germain was saying that we are capable of directing our life energy by making contact with the God that lies within us all. He explained that constructive desire is the expanding activity within life, for it is only in this way that greater and greater ideas, activity and accomplishments are pushed through. Now Guy's head must be bloody spinning at this point, so he takes a couple of days to write down exactly what happened, and one morning after his bizarre encounter, he wakes up to find a gold card lying on the table near his couch. He claimed that there was a message engraved in violet that told him to be at our trysting place on the mountain at 7 in the morning. It was a message from St Germain. Now, not wanting to stand him up, Guy hikes to the meeting spot, sits down and waits for him, and then he's approached by a panther. Guy was initially terrified when the panther approached him, but then he felt the mighty presence of God and said that this presence was all love, and the panther was part of God too, so he had no reason to be scared of him because it's all just love. He just projected all of this love towards the panther, and the panther was super chill. They just started playing with each other. Then St Germain showed up and gave Guy 4 brown cakes, which Guy obviously gobbled down, resulting in his experiencing a clearness of mind. It's all got a bit weird, isn't it? To cut a very long, fantastical and completely fictional story short, him and St Germain go gallivanting around the world, and it is almost as if Guy Ballard is being trained by St Germain. It's a very similar story to Helena Blavatsky being taken under the wing of the so-called masters in Tibet. It's also remarkably similar to A Dweller on Two Planets, even down to the appearance of a panther, literally in both books. According to St Germain, he'd been looking for someone to tell all of the secrets of the universe to, and Guy was the lucky one that he'd chosen. Germain had just gotten good vibes off of him. He looks him up and down and he was like, yeah, you'll do. Guy was to become the messenger of the Great White Brotherhood and the Ascended Host. He was going to be the bridge between the Ascended Masters and all of us normies. St Germain makes sure to communicate with Guy about how the destiny of the United States is of great import to the other nations of the earth, and he also talks about his own involvement with the US government and how the United States will usher in a new golden age. This nationalistic focus on the United States won't be surprising for anyone familiar with theosophy. According to Helena Blavatsky, a 6th subrace is currently emerging in the American Southwest, and Guy and Edna Ballard definitely had a soft spot for nationalism. Guy Ballard also claims to have met a bunch of characters from Venus on New Year's Eve 1930, where they did a strange ceremony and Edna and his son were there too, and they were shown scenes from the next 70 years on Earth. Guy wrote that the sinister force attempting to create chaos and destruction throughout the world will be completely destroyed and peace shall reign on Earth. I'll leave you to make up your own mind as to whether or not that prediction was accurate. The mentions of Venus have led many to assert that the I Am activity was the first modern UFO religion, and you can certainly see their influence in later cults like Heaven's Gate. The book closes with the sentence, America, God bless you and clothe you now with the everlasting shadowless light. Now, what Guy Ballard was doing in the early 1930s, I quite literally have no idea. There are people that say that he was just kind of floating around in California, going to metaphysical lectures and moving in spiritualist circles. He personally claims to have been on the ranch of a diamond miner named Daniel Rayborn, who had his own connection to St Germain, and he also claims to have gone to Washington, D.C. BC with St Germain to meet a secret government that served the light. My personal take is that the St Germain story is heavily plagiarised nonsense, most likely cooked up in the years that Guy was on the run from the law. In the book Psychic Dictatorship, Gerald Bryan lays out very succinctly just how much the Ballards plagiarised in their writing. Guy and Edna have three strong interests that bind them together: a knowledge of esoteric literature, an overactive imagination, and a lust for cash. They were most likely in contact with each other throughout that time, and so when Guy re-emerged in Chicago, they were ready to launch their new movement. And Edna had been laying the groundwork in those early years, teaching secret esoteric classes where she would read from a wide variety of occult, New Thought and theosophical writings, including those of William Dudley Pelley. William Dudley Pelley was an anti-Semite, a fascist, a racist, and an all-round despicable human being. He was the founder of the fascist group Silver Legion of America, more commonly known as the Silver Shirts, but before that he worked as a missionary and then as a journalist and a screenwriter. His most popular piece of writing was a 1928 essay titled 7 Minutes in Eternity, where he claimed that his soul had left his body and that he'd experienced heaven. According to Pelley, he had plunged down a mystic depth of cool blue space and had found himself lying naked on a marble slab with two men in white uniforms looking over him. He claimed to have met with God and Jesus and seen an array of masters, and that they told him he was to lead a spiritual revolution. After his experience, he claimed to have strange new powers of perception and that he could levitate and see through walls. One of the things that interests me about the way that he describes his encounter, other than how completely bonkers it is how similar it sounds to more modern UFO abduction stories. The marble slab and the two men in uniforms looking over him. It's given Barney and Betty Hill, and is interesting considering what Pelley did after the Silver Legion, but we'll get on to that. America was full of seekers, and when the article came out, he built quite a following for himself out of the spiritualist movement. But things started to go a little bit sour when he started talking about Christian economics and a Christian America. In his early years, he'd been a missionary in Siberia, working with the White Russians against the communists during the Russian Civil War. It was here that he began to fuse together a hatred of communists with a hatred of Jewish people, heavily influenced by his own interpretation of Christianity. Now, I don't want to beat around the bush here. Christianity has a long history of anti-Semitism. You only need to have a cursory look at the New Testament to see pages filled with hatred towards Jewish people. We also know that theosophy was anti-Semitic from its very inception. Helena Blavatsky was connected to Juliana Glinka, who was a theosophist herself, and she was believed to be involved with disseminating the anti-Semitic hoax text, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It was originally published in Russian in 1903, but was translated into English in 1919. And just a year later, Henry Ford's newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, published a series of anti-Semitic pamphlets titled The International Jew. Both of these contributed dramatically to racial anti-Semitism in the early 20th century, along with the theories that came from so-called scientific racism, which was popular at the turn of the century. For William Dudley Pelley, it was convenient for him to blame his lack of financial success as a Hollywood screenwriter on a marginalised group of people. The Great Depression encouraged his move into politics, and he wanted to create what he called a Christian Commonwealth in the United States. He laid out his plan for what he called Christian democracy in his book No More Hunger in 1933. The Silver Shirts called themselves a patriotic Christian movement, but they were really paramilitary fascists that exploited the economic uncertainty of the Great Depression, telling people that communists and Jewish people were to blame. Pelley's Silver Shirts were his version of Hitler's brown shirts, and according to Sarah Atwood, Pelley saw Hitler's rise as fulfillment of a prophecy wherein Pelley would subsequently create a Christian militia to save the United States from upcoming political and spiritual chaos. Silver Shirts recruits were to be of reasonably sound health and not afraid to risk your life and limb for your country. and they must take the oath of the true Christian soldier. Philip Jenkins also writes that Pelly became the nation's best known figure on the paramilitary far right, and he inspired Sinclair Lewis's imaginary American dictator, Buzz Windrip, in the 1935 novel It Can't Happen Here. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Well, not only did Edna Ballard read from Pelly's magazine, The New Liberator, they also recruited their first followers from Pelly's fascist silver shirts. At some point in the early 1930s, Pelly even met with Guy and Edna himself, and it's alleged that they asked him to study under them. But Pelly, a wannabe fascist dictator himself, rejected them. The timeline is hard to pin down, but in the early 30s, the Ballards, predominantly Edna, were holding these secret classes and most likely cooking up the Mount Shasta story. They eventually founded the St Germain Press in 1934, and they published Unveiled Mysteries, unveiling their own religious movement in the process. The book was instantly popular among Pelly's audience. Remember, most of them were originally interested in him via his more spiritual writings, and at the time, both Pelly and his silver shirts were being investigated by the authorities, and he was eventually indicted on 16 counts of securities violations in May 1934. This was just the beginning of a whole host of legal troubles for Pelly, and people started to jump ship. They could see that Pelly was going down, and they didn't want to go with him, so enter Guy and Edna. Unveiled Mysteries was published under the pseudonym Godfrey Ray King, and Edna started going by the name Lotus Ray King. While Guy was seemingly the one having these strange experiences, Edna was most definitely the brains behind the operation. She was clearly well read, most likely from her years working at the occult bookstore. And in the book Psychic Dictatorship, Gerald Bryan asserts that Edna was the one that did most of the work, while Guy was the theatrical face of the I Am activity. Edna wasn't shy and retiring. She was known to be opinionated and headstrong, with some referring to her as the man of the marriage, which is obviously outdated, but it's the 1930s, lay off them. She even earned the nickname Little Dynamite from St Germain himself. It did take the Ballards a little while to firm up their ideology, and the I Am presence wasn't referenced in print until they published The Magic Presence in 1935, but they were already talking about it in summer 1934 when they held their first ever 10-day class at their home in Chicago. Most of the people in that first ever 10-day class were former Pelly associates, including Harry Sieber, who was the treasurer of Pelly's organization. The students were relayed messages from St Germain via Edna, and they were also told about their past lives, and I'm sure you won't be at all surprised to hear that they were all connected to each other in some weird way in previous lifetimes. St Germain even said that they had all come into this life with the desire to assist in perfecting or bringing into perfection a new government in America. What's the bloody chances of that they would just all get together among millions of people? And also, what are the chances that St Germain would have relatively similar political aspirations to William Dudley Pelly? See, St Germain, as channeled through Guy and Edna, explicitly referenced William Dudley Pelly, saying that in Christian democracy are splendid ideals possible of achievement, and he even referenced Pelly's own economic doctrine, the plan of no more hunger, saying that it is not entirely correct, but the full plan of it will be revealed as you move forward. See, Pelly was just missing that key ingredient, a connection with the master St Germain. The Ballard's grift worked. People really bought into it, including Pelly's former silver shirt treasurer, who became the associate director of the St Germain activity. And shortly after this first 10-day bonkers bonanza, the Ballards, along with their new associate director, left Chicago to launch their Save America program. But what did the Ballards actually believe in? And what is the I Am presence? The first references to this idea of I Am come from the Bible, specifically the book of Exodus, where Moses asks for God's name and God replies, I am who I am, or I am that I am. I'm pulling this next bit directly off of Wikipedia. I don't usually do it, but I just want this to be accurate. According to the Hebrew Bible, the encounter of the burning bush, Moses asks what he is to say to the Israelites when they ask what the gods have sent to them, and Yahweh replies,
I am that I am. Thou shalt say, I am hath sent me unto you.
The New Thought movement really took on this idea of I am, and there are multiple references to it from New Thought teachers like Charles Fillmore and Joseph C. Benner. Benner wrote a book called The Impersonal Life in 1914, and you might have heard of it because it was allegedly the book that Elvis had on him when he died. And apparently Elvis was like so obsessed with this bloody book that he used to give it out to everyone. On almost every page in this book, there's a reference to I am, and Joseph Benner alleged that the book contained channeled messages that he had gotten from God. Another person that wrote about the I am was Bard T. Spalding in his book Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East Volume 1. It was published in 1924, and he writes about my I am, my Christ consciousness. Spalding was clearly another person influenced by Blavatsky and also Christianity. And in his book, he bangs on about how important America is and how it must accept Christ consciousness to realise her possibilities. And I'm sure you won't be at all surprised to know that the Ballards were quite friendly with him at the beginning of the 1930s. Guy and Edna's I Am movement might have its roots in theosophy, but it considered itself more Christian than anything else. Within the I Am movement, Jesus is an important ascended master, and obviously Jesus' ascension is spoken about in the Bible. Guy and Edna Ballard taught that God, the I Am, is within all of us, and that the I Am presence emanated from the heart of the cosmos, and as it individualized, creation resulted.
The mighty I Am that is the source of all life, energy, intelligence, and activity of every human being that's embodied. Therefore, if you will understand and see how, instead of the old idea, how can I make my permanent contact with God, the truth is you never were disconnected.
To put it in the plainest of explanations, we're all part of God, and if you want to get closer to the I Am presence, aka God that's inside all of us, you can do it by repeating affirmations and decrees. The I Am presence can generate what Guy and Edna called the violet flame. Remember, violet is a significant colour for St Germain. According to them, the violet flame is God's flame of divine love, and when it's called into action, it increases the vibratory action of the substance to a rate that no discord nor imperfection can exist. Think of it as a spiritual vibe shift. It's what the ascended masters used to ascend, and according to Guy and Edna, all of us must use the violet flame to free ourselves from this mortal coil and ascend like we're supposed to. There's a handy diagram that shows a person standing within the violet flame. Above them, another figure projects a golden light that connects with them. This is the I Am, and behind them is the mighty I Am presence, shown as a myriad of bright colours. Connecting to the I Am presence generates the violet flame, and it gets rid of all of the nastiness and off vibes. It's a bit like mixing yourself a flask of wondrous psychic. I don't think it would be possible to get an Elden Ring reference into this video, but here we are, proud of myself. According to Edna Ballard herself, when mankind understands the power of the attention, the vision, the power of qualification through the spoken word, they can positively reach to the heights of creation. It's Tony Robbins shit, but with a new age Christian esoteric twist and a little sprinkle of nationalism and fascism thrown in for good measure. These 10-day classes were the 1930s answer to Unleash the Power Within, although I'm not sure if Guy and Edna Ballard could have got an Oprah to walk over hot coals. Instead of prayer, I Am followers will repeat decrees. You can think of these almost like affirmations. They're to be repeated and shouted and willed into existence. And all of them were to come from Guy and Edna Ballard, the accredited messengers of the Ascended Masters.
Mighty I Am, friends, in the name, love, wisdom, and power which thou art, I charge the purse, the pocketbook of each one here that eternal supply of money that is never absent, that is never late. Mighty I Am, present, see thy wisdom directed use, hold the attention upon thee, the treasure house of the universe, and release through thy love, wisdom, and power in the human octave, and through thee, divine order and divine channels, that limitless supply they require, money or anything else. From this hour henceforth, every honest, earnest, sincere I Am student shall be able to call forth their financial supply without limit.
Like a lot of these groups, the followers were encouraged to separate themselves from non-believers, probably due to energetics. How can you save the soul of a country if you're surrounding yourself with low-vibe people? In the book These Also Believe, Charles Samuel Braden says that there was a distinction within the group in the form of the 100%ers, who were committed 100% to following the I Am teachings. To be enrolled as one, it was necessary for the I Am students to follow no other teachings, to abstain from meat, onion, garlic, tobacco, liquor, narcotics, playing cards, and to avoid all sex activities. They also believed that animals were created by black magic and that they were imprisoned life. So if you had a pet, the most humane thing to do in their eyes was to put it down, and many followers literally killed their pets. They were also vegetarians for this reason, like you don't want to be consuming the flesh of an imprisoned spirit. They also believed that deserts were barren because of discord within humanity, and that by humanity connecting to the I Am presence and ridding themselves of this discord, beautiful gardens would pop up in the American Southwest.
Even your Death Valley will arise and become a garden.
I don't know what they've got against deserts. Personally, I'm a big desert girl. My favourite state is Nevada, and I don't go in for people slandering the beautiful landscape of the American Southwest. Turn it into a garden? We bloody joking. Obviously, they didn't encourage traditional medical care, which isn't at all surprising.
And there is no condition in the human body or outside that does not yield to the power of life.
Just rely on channeling positive thoughts and repeating the I Am decrees and all will be well.
But I'm sure no one wants to be lacking in health and strength. So we make this call. Mighty I Am presence, charge thy mighty current of energy in and through each mind and body and around them, and sweep out. Sweep out. Sweep out. All imperfection, all growth, unnecessary growth, all density of substance that's gathered anywhere, whether it be gallstones or the substance at the joints or anywhere else in the body, dissolve it this instant and remove it from those bodies.
You'll be cured. St Germain's got you, babe. You don't need to go to the hospital. Alongside all of this, they heavily pushed the idea of twin rays, now more commonly known as twin flames. It's basically this idea that there are twin souls out there. Your perfect soulmate is just waiting for you to have a connection with them. Obviously, Guy and Edna are twin rays, and in some of their previous incarnations, Guy had been none other than George Washington, and Edna had been Joan of Arc. Weirdly, followers of I Am called them Daddy and Mummy Ballard. There's probably something there to analyse, especially considering that they also told their followers the sex urge was only to be used for procreation. When it is used for so-called pleasure, mankind loses the dominion of his physical form. When it is wasted, the body becomes decrepit and helpless. Your aura becomes charged with the most vicious entities you can imagine. They even had their own goddess of purity that made it abundantly clear that you should not be sowing your wild oats, just in case you thought this was a 1930s free love kind of deal. Instead, they emphasised the need to work on yourself, to focus on connecting to the God presence inside of you. Certain forms of spirituality have always been individualistic and libertarian at their core, often emphasising the power of the individual over the collective. And Guy and Edna's new religious movement was no different.
Mankind has free will, and no human being on the face of this earth has any right to interfere with another.
It was all up to you. You have the power to change your life. You can connect with God. You can save the soul of the United States of America. And people fucking loved it. A According to Gerald Bryan, before taking their spiritual teachings on the road, the Ballards were broke. Guy's been scamming people, and the little money that he'd been making from gold mines and stocks was long gone. They needed to find a way to make ends meet, and what's better than selling enlightenment? Their first class outside of Chicago was held in Philadelphia in October 1934, and they were really popular. Guy and Edna channeled the spirit of St Germain, who would tell the audience that there were vicious forces inside the United States and that the only way to destroy them was through repeating their decrees. Through listening to Guy Ballard do his preaching shtick, you can kind of see how people would have been drawn in.
Mighty I am present, the name, love, wisdom, and power which thou art. I charge this room, this ascended master consciousness, and present. In the name, love, wisdom, and power which thou art, I charge the consciousness of each one here with the ascended master present, self, luminous, intelligent substance, and power of light.
He's giving cattle auctioneer meets Kenneth Copeland.
I demand a vaccination to come immediately. Yeah.
And for some, that is a heady brew of charisma. In the book Psychic Dictatorship, Guy Ballard is described as a tall, meticulously dressed man of some 60 years of age, usually attired in an immaculate white suit, over which, for variety, he sometimes very effectively drapes a long indigo blue cape with shiny white satin lining, or sometimes a full-length all-white one. In the glare of the footlights, there is much sparkle of jewels from rings and tie pins as he bows and gesticulates before his audience. He's a flashy guy. Remember, he's got an obsession with gold and jewels. He's a bit of a magpie, and he's also a fucking scam artist. I guess we can think of him as a new age righteous gemstone. He woos the crowd by promising them a life of abundance, telling them that only he, Edna, and their son Donald are the true accredited messengers of St Germain. They're the chosen ones, and St Germain just so happens to have a stash of gold hidden away, and maybe one day, if you're good, you might get a piece of it. And how do you know if you've been good? Well, according to St Germain, if you don't give, then you don't receive. At the classes, you would be given an envelope with the words "I am love gift" written on the front. But these donations definitely didn't go to Guy and Edna. That'd be crazy. No, see, the donations allowed the students to open up channels for blessings from the ascended masters. Now, this wasn't a religion either, definitely not. It was a patriotic movement to save the soul of America, and as such, the US flag was absolutely everywhere at these classes. They were extremely colourful affairs, but there was one colour that St Germain absolutely hated, and that was red. And why did he hate it? Well, St Germain was a vehement anti-communist, and he even said that one day the red on the flag of the US would be changed to gold, and it would happen when the ascended masters finally take control of the country. Not at all alarming. The I Am activity contained references to the American Revolution as well, with two groups inside the main movement, one named the Minutemen of St Germain and another called the Daughters of Light. You can think of the Minutemen as almost like Guy Ballard's personal militia, although thankfully it never got that far, and they gave him the title of Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America. Now, I don't want to understate it. Guy and Edna Ballard wanted to overthrow the government of the United States in the name of the Ascended Masters, and their movement was modelled after the fascist paramilitary group that they recruited directly out of. Their tour of the East Coast led them to Washington, D.C. What better place for a movement tasked with saving the soul of America? They held a 10-day class there in January 1935, and that's when tragedy struck their associate director and former treasurer of Pelley's Silver Shirts, Harry Sieber. See, he'd stepped out of the Ballard's car and been immediately hit by another on January 13th, resulting in a fractured skull and leg injuries. William Dudley Pelley would later say, strange indeed are the denouement of events in the lives of those who take up the silver shirt work and then turn back. Very ominous. Guy and Edna weren't exactly sympathetic either. They said that he'd been struck by the car because he had moved outside of the circle of light that they had put around it. Basically, their way of saying it's your own bloody fault and you're on your own. Guy and Edna even went on to claim that Harry had died in hospital and that another entity had occupied his body, because after his recovery, he started denouncing both of them. So they're just like, nah, that's another bloke. Somebody else has gotten in there and now he's walking around and he's chatting mad shit. Harry himself said, "I had no business to tie up with such people. It is a terrible thing to me and has preyed terribly on my mind and my soul for releasing and starting the terrible thing which they represent." I do love that it's Guy and Edna that preyed terribly on his mind and not his role in a paramilitary Nazi organisation. But anyway, in the spring and summer of 1935, the Ballards travelled to California and the people of the Golden State really picked up what they were putting down. Remember, Los Angeles and California in general has been a hub for New Age cult activity, and just a few years prior, Los Angeles had been the stomping ground for May Otis Blackburn and her Divine Order. In Los Angeles, they were selling out huge halls and expanding on their teachings. The love gifts were flowing and they had money. They looked flashy and successful, and that was appealing for a lot of people, especially as the United States began to emerge from the Depression years. They set up their I Am classes almost like a pyramid scheme. Through Guy and Edna, you'd connect to the I Am presence, and if you were a good student or one of the chosen few, you'd get to teach others how to do it too. Guy and Edna didn't want to be restricted to one place. They wanted to spread the message of St Germain and the Ascended Masters far and wide and get that cash flowing. So they called upon St Germain to appoint a sevenfold committee to oversee the many classes that were popping up all over the place. But in some of these classes, the teachings began to stray from the doctrine and decrees handed down from Guy and Edna Ballard, and they weren't happy with that at all. According to them, their employees had been willingly trying to deceive students by teaching unauthorized doctrines. They needed to get a handle on the grift, and so St Germain decided to fire a bunch of people, and shit starts to get a bit culty if it wasn't already, with Guy and Edna saying that it wouldn't end well for those that tried to get in the way of the true teachings of the I Am presence. It's very much don't think for yourself, just accept what the accredited messengers are telling you and don't listen to divergent voices. They're just trying to lead you astray. Guy and Edna recruited a lot of their followers via mail. They ran advertisements for their classes and books in newspapers and corresponded with potential followers via letters. And they weren't just selling enlightenment, they actively told people that they would be able to ascend too. Guy claimed that he had access to a chair that he called the atomic accelerator, and obviously it was gold, which he used to help a white-haired elderly gentleman called David ascend.
And I want to say, for your leisure, that the only one there who is not a cosmic being, David Lloyd, might well be considered one. In his great enthusiasm, his great love for the messengers, and his great tremendous power of release in his recent ascension.
One of the huge attractions of the I Am activity was that they would claim to be able to help you escape this world and make it to the next level. It's all sounding a little bit Marshall Applewhite, and Benjamin Zeller writes in his book Heaven's Gate that the Ascended Masters were embodied, having ascended from Earth to the higher realms that they now inhabited. The lineup of Ascended Masters in the I Am activity was more or less the same as Theosophy, but Guy and Edna literally just made up a bunch of new ones and added them on. They claimed that Daniel Rayborn, the diamond mine owner that Guy claimed to have stayed with in Wyoming in the early 1930s, was a master, and so was his wife, beloved Nada. Alongside them was the great divine director, the goddess of liberty and mighty victory. I'm sure that there's plenty of others too, it's hard to keep track. There is one thing that stands out to me in the depictions of them. I wonder if you can guess what it is. They're literally all white, like even Sanat Kumara, and Jesus is depicted as being blonde haired and blue eyed. The Ballards were quite literally selling Ascension, and many of their original followers have made the list of Ascended Masters, including Lady Master Becky, Ascended Master Mr. Blackman, and Brother Bill. Those are literally just a few of the Bs. If you have a look look through this list, it's like a who's who of just like people that were following them back in the 1930s that are now ascended. Now, like I mentioned before, these I Am classes were incredibly popular. They were quite grand. Don't forget that Edna was a performer, so she definitely knew how to put on a good show. And music was a huge part of these 10-day extravaganzas. Oh, great divine director. It's great. But to have a good grift, you're going to want to have some diversified revenue streams. And I'm sure that that's what Guy and Edna were thinking in February 1936 when they released the first issue of their magazine called The Voice of I Am, charging a subscription rate of $3 a year. A bloody bargain. But that wasn't all. They started publishing the I Am discourses. These were basically written up decrees channeled from the ascended masters. Guy and Edna told their followers that the books exuded cosmic radiation and that the masters were present during the printing and basically charged up the books with magical energy.
And if you think this good messenger was responsible for those, then you are most unfortunate indeed. Those dictations are by those whose names are attached, and therefore carry the ascended master qualities into your world.
They were sold at around $3 each, which again, you know, like, that is reasonable. I'm not going to argue with those prices. But the thing was, you needed to buy all of them. It had very big pre-Scientology vibes, and they even said themselves,
if you have not the full set of those books, do not let another 30 days go over your head before you have them.
I want to think about what happens to you after 30 days.
Read those books and which give the full power of the explanation. Oh, my dear ones, if you have read them 50 times, still may you read them 50 times more and yet marvel each time. You can't comprehend with the intellect what's there unless you have entered into the power of the quality that is there. And in these books that have come forth, let me inform you tonight, step by step, they have come forth in their power of radiation. Full and complete explanation is there for all who will set aside human intellectual opinions, study it with a desire to know and not to find some discrepancy.
They also told their followers,
you who have had a struggle financially, if you will only make your earnest application, I assure you that all obstruction will be removed from your pathway.
Basically, give us all your money and we'll make your dreams come true. The artwork that appeared in The Voice of I Am does have a certain charm to it. Most of it designed by Charles Sindler and published out of his studios. He was also known as the Western representative of the St Germain press. He was married to Pearl Sindler, who was a silent film actress who had starred in multiple pictures in the early part of the 20th century. He was commissioned to paint some of the ascended masters and claimed that they actually sat for him. Like Jesus and St Germain just sat down and were like, go on, Charles, give it your best shot. One of the most popular images of St Germain was actually painted by him, and it continues to be used to this day along with this painting of Jesus. Now, 1936 was an interesting year. William Dudley Pelley ran for president and gained 1,598 votes. Thank God that was it. And one of the I Am followers, known as Lady Donna, founded the I Am School in Los Angeles to teach the children how to connect to their presence, as well as, you know, maths and English and all that 3D stuff. There were also I Am activity reading rooms in Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and San Diego. And alongside this, an enemy of the Ballards emerged. Now, Gerald Bryan had begun to publish brochures trying to expose their scams. He had his own religious beliefs, which made him highly critical of the Ballards, and it's best to read his later published book, Psychic Dictatorship, with a bit of a skeptical eye. But whatever you think of him, he really did expose the Ballards, interviewing ex-followers and getting the juicy gossip. And to this day, it is actually the only book that's written about them. Now, the Ballards hated him so much that they encouraged all of their followers to buy the brochures and burn them. And they even held burning parties. This was a huge theme in I Am. Don't think for yourself. Don't read anything other than the I Am literature, because if you go against against the ascended masters, there will be terrible consequences. Gerald Bryan wasn't the only one denouncing the Ballards, with Philip Jenkins writing that
theosophical magazines rejected Ballardism as a perversion of occult inquiry, and in 1937, Rosicrucian H. Spencer Lewis denounced these mystical racketeers. He ruefully confessed that his own writings on Lemuria had provided Ballard with some of his sources.
But why would the followers turn their backs on the teachings when the masters were quite literally trying to save humanity? According to channeled messages from St Germain, since 1935, the body of the beast of Revelation had been hovering over Europe, but the head of the beast was over New York because that's where all the communists were. So boring. We get it, Germain. You bloody hate communists, you libertarian idiot. The I Am followers have been trying to dissolve this fucking beast for years, but it was only in a 1938 class in Los Angeles that St Germain announced that the years of decrees had finally worked and the beast had begun to dissolve, and conflict would soon stop in Europe as a result. Now, considering that World War II properly kicked off in like 1939, I am starting to think that St Germain doesn't know what he's bloody talking about. They also told their audiences that there were gas belts underneath major cities and that these were the cause of earthquakes. Now, it's obviously not true, but it instilled a level of fear and reverence amongst their followers. Edna even made some wild claims about how an ascended master that they made up, called K-17, had stopped German submarines from heading towards the Panama Canal. K-17 also happened to be the head of what the Ballards called the Inner Secret Service, and K-17 claimed that this Inner Secret Service was in contact with the real world one, alluding to this idea of the ascended masters having control over the government, and that's a belief that's still popular today in New Age circles. And speaking of the government, like William Dudley Pelley's silver shirts, they denounced FDR for being a communist, despite the fact that FDR was most definitely not a communist. The Ballards went as far as to send death decrees to FDR and his wife Eleanor, saying blast, blast, blast their carcasses from the face of the earth forever. That's my impression of Guy Ballard. I hope you liked it. Obviously, they hated him because Guy Ballard saw himself and St Germain as the true leaders of America, and they wanted to usher in their own new government, with many of their ideas taken directly from the pages of William Dudley Pelley, whose own publishing company said,
Mrs. Ballard was a student of Mr. Pelley's spiritual philosophy before she launched upon her purported mission to save Christian America. All her writings and teachings are full of material which she appropriated from Mr. Pelley's writings.
In Gerald Bryan's Psychic Dictatorship, he very heavily implies that the Ballards wanted to take out FDR, and he quotes from a talk that St Germain had with the staff in August of 1938, where Germain said,
"Be very careful, all of you, in referring to Roosevelt or Mrs. Roosevelt by name openly. Be sure you don't do it. Because you see, these sinister forces, if they got sufficient hold of individuals in the government, they might trump up charges to interfere with this work from the government's standpoint."
Basically, yeah, wish them death, but don't explicitly reference their names. The last thing we want is the bloody feds knocking at the door. The Ballards spent the majority of 1936 to 1938 travelling around the United States. They packed out Masonic temples and auditoriums from Portland to Detroit, and Edna Ballard became a fixture on radio stations nationwide, usually broadcasting for 15 minutes on a Sunday morning.
Good morning. Sunday morning.
The money was rolling in. There were thousands of I Am followers across the country, but strangely, they hadn't returned to their home city of Chicago. But in October 1938, they finally made it back to much fanfare, and they held a 10-day class for the people of the Windy City. They packed out a large opera house, and the Chicago Herald and Examiner even dropped by, writing that there were throngs of well-dressed, intelligent-looking followers, and they estimated that around 50,000 people would attend across the 10 days. At the end of each class, Guy would make his way to the lobby where he would sit and autograph books. He claimed to have St Germain next to him, and together they would radiate special energy into each book that was signed. But neither St Germain or Guy's group of Minutemen could protect him from what was coming on October 13th, 1938.
Lord have mercy.
Despite claims to the contrary, there was a very worldly reason why Guy and Edna Ballard hadn't stepped foot in Chicago for several years. All was revealed when Guy, while signing books in the lobby of the Opera House, was served with a summons in a $10,906 lawsuit. According to the lawsuit,
sometime prior to and about the years 1923 or 1924, the plaintiff became acquainted with Guy Ballard, and Guy defrauded her of large sums of money in what he called the Cottonwood Trust.
He told potential investors that there was a lake of gold in California that they were going to drain and then mine, and after the lawsuit was filed, the press were all over it. They revealed that investors lost up to around $500,000. He's swindling mad money here, and he's doing the same thing to the I Am followers too, promising them all manner of riches and escape from their woes. Don't forget, we're talking about the era of the Great Depression, and money can be a powerful motivator for people that don't have any. In typical Ballard fashion, they claimed that the lawsuit was a vicious attack and that it had only happened because St Germain had gone away that night on European business, whatever that means. And also, I thought he was supposed to be there doing the signing. He was supposed to be on his right, like whenever he was signing the book. What a lie! Man can't even cover up his lies. But apparently St Germain did come back the day afterwards, and he called the plaintiff a liar. Through researching the Ballards, I can't help but get L. Ron Hubbard vibes, like especially when Guy said things like,
"You must prevent the press, reporters, and all outer channels from making any false statements about this work. Silence everything of that kind throughout the world forever."
Everyone that doesn't agree with them is evil. Don't think for yourself. Buy our books, all of them, not just one, because it is the only way towards self-mastery and abundance. It's all very Scientology. And like the Scientologists, the Ballards made some pretty grandiose claims, including saying that they had 1 million followers by 1939. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of people did follow them, but 1 million is a bit of a stretch. It turns out that people had been trying to get hold of the money that Guy had defrauded them out of for some time. And in 1934, Guy had replied to one of them, saying, and I quote,
"Your letter received after some delay. I have no money for myself, you, or anyone else. If you will remind yourself of the thought and feeling of condemnation, hatred, and the wish to take away the liberty of God's children, then you will understand why you have no position, money, or health. For what you think, feel, and desire for another, you draw with invincible power into your own life and experience whether you believe it or not."
He's basically saying, like, you know what, love? It's your own bloody fault for being scammed by me. If your mind had been sorted out, and if you connected with the I Am presence, then you would have never fallen for my scam in the first place. It's all to do with you. It's all your mind. Your thoughts drew me in, and that's the reason why you're broke. He's like the 1930s Bob Proctor. He's like a new age Ayn Rand. His whole thing is like, if you're getting scammed out of money, then maybe you never deserved it in the first place. The lawsuit against Guy was going to go to trial in early January 1940, but things didn't exactly go to plan, because at 5 a.m. on December 29th, 1939, Guy Ballard died from heart issues. What a way to go. Like, where's fucking St Germain when that's happening? Edna didn't tell the followers about his death until January 1st, where she claimed that he had ascended. But it threw a bit of a spanner in the works of their beliefs. See, you were supposed to ascend and enter into heaven alive. That's what they'd been selling to everyone. And instead, Guy had just croaked and been cremated. Not to be deterred though, Edna just changed up the teachings a little bit, claiming that when you ascend, you do die a normal death, but you go to a higher level of heaven than your average Joe. There wasn't a huge amount of public mourning for Guy, because they literally believed that he wasn't dead. He'd just graduated and joined St Germain and the other ascended masters. But back in the world of the living, shit was about to hit the fan. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The world was on high alert, and despite the US not officially getting involved in World War II until 1941, there was widespread fear about a Nazi fifth column within the United States. Germans. Beginning in late 1939, the FBI had been receiving letters from concerned citizens telling them about this strange cult of I Am. On January 27, 1940, a man named T. Ray Holsinger wrote to J. Edgar Hoover, one of the worst ghouls that has ever walked the face of the planet, I just want to be clear, telling him that he was concerned about this new religious movement. And he alludes to a local Russian man being involved, so obviously the feds start investigating and collating information on I Am. There's a particularly interesting letter in the FBI files from May 31st, 1940, from a concerned American citizen that talks about how some of the I Am followers claimed that Hitler himself was a member of the organisation and that the I Am followers are vegetarians and so was Hitler. Therefore, there's got to be some connection, right? 1940 was a bad year for Edna Ballard. Guy has ascended and Gerald Bryan released his book Psychic Dictatorship in America. And if that wasn't enough, in July 1940, Edna, Donald and 22 leaders of the I Am activity were indicted for mail fraud charges. The Los Angeles Times reported that the Ballards had collected close to $3 million since its inception in 1930. It's a huge amount of money, considering that they'd really only taken it on the road from 1935. The indictment alleged that a large number of people were defrauded through false representations, pretenses and promises. It is stated that the victims purchased books, magazines, pictures, articles and other stuff offered for sale and were induced to become followers and accept the teachings and movements sponsored by the defendants, and were induced to give, send and pay money and give things of value to the defendants because of these false representations. Interestingly, one of the I Am leaders named in the indictment was a man named Robert Lefebvre, who went on to create the libertarian anarcho-capitalist Freedom School and Rampart College, and he later became the inspiration for one of the main characters in Elon Musk's favourite book, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Some of Robert Lefebvre's students included the Koch brothers, and Robert Lefebvre liked to spend his time union busting and campaigning against any policies that seek to improve conditions for working people, all under the guise of preserving freedom and liberty. But the Freedom School didn't just teach how to fuck the working class, they also taught Holocaust denial. And according to Mark Ames, the Holocaust denial articles in Rampart's journal were significant enough to be included today on the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's Holocaust denial timeline. Also under Koch's watch, Lefebvre created a history program headed by one of the biggest names in early Holocaust denialism, James J. Martin. And I just think that is a perfect example of the link between fascist ideology, New Age woo-woo and libertarianism. The rugged individualism that underpins a lot of the New Age movement is the exact same thing you'll find in libertarian ideology. Libertarianism values the individual over society as a whole. It doesn't believe that personal freedom and liberty can be vastly improved for everyone by improving material conditions for the collective. Instead, they would literally rather see individuals die. And if you think that's me making a stretch, here's a clip of Ron Paul at the 2012 Republican primaries.
My advice to him would have a major medical policy, but not before.
But he doesn't have that. He doesn't have it, and he needs intensive care for 6 months. Who pays?
That's what freedom is all about, taking your own risk. This whole idea that you have to prepare and take care of everybody.
But Congressman, are you saying that society should just let him die?
No.
Literally cheering on death. You gotta love that freedom, baby. Anyway, I keep hammering this point because the individualism that underpins the New Age movement is basically the exact same shit that came out of the Chicago school. They don't care about the liberty or freedom of exploited workers and oppressed people. They care about profit. They want you to believe that there is no such thing as a society, that you're poor because you're poor. It's not because you're getting exploited by a capitalist who pays you a pittance while they reap all of the rewards from your work. And it's definitely not because the measly amount that you're being paid can barely cover the cost of living, which just keeps going up. You're just stuck in ego with all of your little negative thoughts, and that is the real problem. Have you considered mindfulness?
They've created a booth for employees to take a moment for themselves called Amazon.
Edna Ballard wasn't going to go down without a fight, and she was quoted as saying, "I accept the challenge of the United States government to show the divine truth of the mighty I Am presence. The followers weren't going to go down either. They flooded the FBI with letters expressing their protest at the indictment. Literally, the FBI files are full of these letters, and I have no doubt that Edna encouraged them to be sent. There were some interesting reports from the FBI too. One from September 1940 talks about a leader of the I Am activity in Honolulu being pro-Hitler, claiming that they had a big picture of him in their house. There were also several FBI reports about how the I Am followers wanted to overthrow the government, which we know is true, even if they never succeeded. On December 3rd, 1940, the jury trial began. Edna and Donald complained that the indictment was unconstitutional because it restricted their freedom to exercise their religion. The court instructed the jury not to think about whether the Ballards' religious teachings were valid or true, and that they should only focus on whether or not they believed that the Ballards believed in the representations that they made about their beliefs in the I Am literature that was sent out in the mail. The trial ended on January 16th, 1941, but the jury were in hopeless disagreement, and it resulted in a mistrial. Their next one wouldn't begin until early December of that year. But there were other legal difficulties in those 12 months leading up to the second trial. They had their tax-exempt status removed. One of their followers was questioned by the Secret Service for threatening FDR's life, and Edna and Donald were sued by the family of Frederick Spencer Oliver, who wrote A Dweller on Two Planets. That lawsuit never went anywhere because it was allegedly a channeled work, and Oliver had been copyrighted as the proprietor, not the author. And that's one of the big problems in this grift. How can you copyright the words of an ancient ascended master? The second trial for the mail fraud indictment reached a verdict on January 31st, 1942. All of the other I Am leaders were found not guilty, but Edna and her son Donald, they were found guilty, despite the I Am followers protesting outside the courthouse. Philip Jenkins writes that the official decision to go after I Am must be seen in the context of general concerns about fascist sex and shirt movements. But another more subtle agenda may have been present. By far the best known of the media religious tycoons was Catholic priest Charles Coughlin, a populist demagogue whose financial enterprises were quite as suspicious as those of the Ballards. From 1938 onwards, Coughlin's broadcasts became anti-Semitic and pro-German, and the Roosevelt administration faced the dilemma of how to silence the priest without alienating the Catholic hierarchy and creating a martyr. The timing of the I Am case raises the possibility that this affair might have been a shot across the bows of other far-right religious broadcasters with shady accounting procedures. Edna and Donald both received suspended prison sentences and some hefty fines, but this didn't stop them from both carrying on with the mission and protesting their innocence. Between 1942 and 1944, the FBI continued to receive letters and write reports on the Ballards, and some of it is very odd. For instance, there's some evidence that points to Donald Ballard trying to acquire a bunch of guns, and the FBI got hold of a letter from a man named Robert E. Gross, who wrote about having 50 objects, all new. None have been fired since testing range. Now, obviously, it's not unusual for Americans to want to buy guns, but it definitely got the attention of the feds, and apparently this Robert guy was trying to sell Donald a plane as well. There's also talk of an inventor that was working for the War Department, and he'd passed on his invention to Edna Ballard because his wife was an I Am follower. I don't know what the hell was going on, but it's definitely interesting, and there's so much in the FBI files that I couldn't go through every page with the fine-tooth comb, but I'll leave a link to the 3 massive PDFs below and you can browse for yourself. In early 1944, Edna and Donald challenged their conviction, and they were granted a new trial in the Circuit Court of Appeals, and they basically said that the original trial was flawed because the judge had told the jury to discount their religious beliefs, but the charges were based on them making false representations on those very beliefs. Therefore, the jury had a responsibility to prove that those beliefs were false, and obviously that's fucking impossible. So the conviction was overturned, but the government wasn't having it, so they appealed to the Supreme Court, and the case was argued between the 3rd and 6th of March 1944. The majority opinion, written by William Douglas, stated that the religious views espoused by respondents might seem incredible, if not preposterous, to most people.
But if those doctrines are subject to trial before a jury, charged with finding their truth or falsity, then the same can be done with the religious beliefs of any sect. When the triers of fact undertake that task, they enter a forbidden domain. The First Amendment does not select any one group or any one type of religion for preferred treatment. It puts them all in that position. Chief Justice Stone dissented, saying that, "I am not prepared to say that the constitutional guarantee of freedom of religion affords immunity from criminal prosecution for the fraudulent procurement of money by false statements as to one's religious experiences, more than it renders polygamy or libel immune from criminal prosecution. I cannot say that freedom of thought and worship includes freedom to procure money by making knowingly false statements about one's religious experiences." Ultimately, the indictment and the convictions were dismissed, and it became a landmark case in religious freedom and the First Amendment. I've got such mixed opinions on this because while I believe in a certain amount of religious freedom, at what point do you stop calling somebody a spiritual guru and start calling them a scam artist? These were people that preyed on vulnerable people in the middle of the Great Depression, accumulating wealth off the backs of those that were taken in by the promise that they could change their material conditions with the power of this I am presence, aka the power of their own mind. They sold a big lie that their followers could attain financial success or good health through sheer determination alone. You gotta read our books, see? You gotta buy our magazines, see? And listen to all our tapes, see? And then all the discord and doubt of any kind will surely be absolved. I'm sorry. Then what is this accent I'm doing? This is fucking embarrassing.
I am what I am. I don't want praise. I don't want pity.
The FBI investigation officially stopped in 1944, but they did continue to collect information on both Edna and Donald, as well as other I Am leaders and followers. The main bulk of the organisation moved to Santa Fe in the early 1940s, as America entered World War II. They claimed that Santa Fe was chosen because of its isolation. No railroad, no streetcars, no paved streets. A quiet, small city of about 17,000. Beloved Lotus approved and gave her permission. They moved everything, including the St Germain Press and the I Am School, and they even had St Germain's hydroponic gardens there. There was such a presence that the Santa Fe New Mexican decided to report on the I Am activity and Edna's prior legal difficulties in 1951, and the followers were not happy with the write-up at all. They stormed into the offices and violently attacked journalists. At around the same time as Edna, Donald and the I Am followers were facing their legal difficulties, William Dudley Pelley was grappling with his own. He was charged with 12 counts of high treason and sedition in April 1942, and he was sent to the maximum security prison Terre Haute, which had been set up just 4 years prior. But while right-wing extremists and anti-Semitic fascists like William Dudley Pelley may have been the enemy in the early 1940s, as the political climate shifted towards the end of World War II and the Cold War cracked open, America had a new enemy, and fascists like Pelley began to be seen as political prisoners and brave anti-communists. Pelley was released from prison in February 1950, and he began to rebuild his following, creating a strange religious system named Soulcraft, and we'll get into the details of that in another video. For now, it's just important to know that Pelley was associating himself with some fairly well-known figures in the world of early ufology, including George Hunt Williamson. For Edna and Donald Ballard, the days of selling out auditoriums were gone. There was too much bad press to attract huge numbers anymore, and towards the end of the 1940s and into the early 50s, America's attention had shifted towards strange activity in the sky. The I Amers never really moved with the times, sticking to their original teachings, and it looks like they didn't even really publish much after Guy Ballard ascended. They did have a ski lodge in Colorado where Edna would broadcast radio messages from, but it
it tragically burned down in 1952. There was infighting and some splits within the movement, with Geraldine Innocente creating the Bridge to Freedom the same year that the Colorado Ski Lodge burned to the ground. It was an offshoot from the I Am activity, and Geraldine had apparently been chatting to the Ascended Masters, and they said that she was a messenger. This new offshoot group caught the attention of Mark Prophet, who would go on to create his own movement called the Summit Lighthouse, and he would eventually marry Elizabeth Clare Wolfe, whose mother was an avid reader and owned the I Am discourses. The Summit Lighthouse would go on to be known as the Church Universal and Triumphant.
Newspaperman Sullivan says it's not the church's religious practice alone that bothers him. It's what he and others in Montana believe may be hidden behind their faith.
They are not to be trusted. They are a cult. Any cult is dangerous. They are a means to an end organization.
Famous for encouraging followers to prepare for imminent nuclear fallout.
I don't consider myself a cult because I am not dominating my members. I lead my people to the heart of the I Am that I Am who appeared to Moses, the individualized presence of God that we commune with. People who believe one way in this country do not give the freedom to others to believe in another way. We have worked very hard on racial bigotry in this country, but we have not worked hard on religious persecution.
And that's all I'll say on them for now. Edna Ballard, or Lotus Ray King, or Little Dynamite, or Mummy Ballard, depending on what you want to call her, died on February 10th, 1971 in Chicago after a brief illness. According to I Am followers, much like Guy, she hadn't died. She ascended into heaven, and the I Am activity carries on to this day. They still have their amphitheatre in Mount Shasta.
We have to see the master. Don't stop us. If we can only get near him, I know my father will be healed.
Their school.
Hello everyone. Welcome to the I Am School. My name is Justin. Let us show you around.
But their tendrils stretch a lot further than that. You see their influence everywhere in the world of the New Age.
Sit only with this natural sense I am. We don't have to move 1 millimeter to find the feeling I am. If you're conscious, it's because the I amness is there. The feeling I exist is there.
From people like Peter Mount Shasta, who even got into legal hot water himself with the I Am activity over copyright claims, to so-called mystery school teachers like Maureen J. St Germain, who wrote the book Waking Up in 5D, as well as Opening the Akashic Records, where she explicitly writes about St Germain's violet flame. These are just two examples. The influence is so far-reaching. You can even see their influence in QAnon, an internet cult that preys on vulnerable people who've been neglected and let down by the system. See, QAnon takes a drop of truth, the concept of a deep state, which up until Q was widely recognised as being a collusion of intelligence agencies, the military and certain corporation, and it twists it into something demonic, playing on age-old anti-Semitic tropes. Instead of pointing out the flaws in the system, Q tells you that actually everything's going to work out fine. Donald Trump and JFK Jr. are doing all of these arrests, and then a new glorious government will be announced, and America will enter a new golden era. Well, sounds a bit familiar, right? You don't need to be a revolutionary when it's all being dealt with behind the scenes by the White Hats or the Great White Brotherhood. When you think about it, it's a remarkably similar ideology to Guy and Edna Ballard, and in turn, people like William Dudley Pelly. It's literally Christian fascism. Swap Trump and JFK Jr. for Guy Ballard and St Germain, and literally, what is the difference? You've just got to hold the line, trust the plan, and remember that where we go one, we go all.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Where we go one, we go all.
Where we go one, we go all.
God bless America.
God bless America.
So when you hear people like Michael Flynn reciting I Am decrees at a Christian event,
well, we will not fear to speak. We will be the instrument of your will. Whatever it is.
I will not fear to speak, and I will be the instrument of God's will, whatever it is.
it doesn't feel all that disconnected. These cults don't seek to improve or change the lives of working people. They seek to exploit them and send them further down the fascist pipeline. And interestingly, the further down you go, the more characters like St Germain you'll meet. You'll find things like Nessara and Jessara. This idea that St Germain has got a financial trust, is going to wipe out all of the debt on the planet, bring in the gold standard and get rid of the banking families. And this is why I find all of the talk about a new age to fascist pipeline incredibly simplistic, because everything that I have seen while researching these videos proves to me time and time again that the new age movement has been steeped in fascist libertarian free market ideology from its very inception. And that's not to say that everybody that believes in this kind of stuff is a fascist, but it is to say that there's a problem here that many people want to pretend doesn't exist. It teaches people that the hardship in their lives is either their fault or the fault of marginalised communities. It doesn't seek to change the material conditions of the working class. It sells them a mythical answer. Don't bother yourself with trying to change this boring 3D world when we can ascend to the 5th dimension, open our third eye and hang out with the tool masters from Venus. And I'm sure some of you are wondering, like, how can people fall for this? But these groups thrive in economically uncertain times, and instead of pointing the finger at capitalism, Guy and Edna Ballard pointed the finger at their followers. They told them that everything that they wanted in life was possible, that St Germain had decreed it so, and to attain it, all you needed to do was believe and dedicate yourself to the I am presence inside of you, as well as buying our books. You didn't need to think bigger or be a revolutionary. You just had to realise that all of the bad things in your life, well, they're kind of your fault for being such a negative Nancy. Don't think about creating a better, fairer world for everyone. That's communism, and that's evil. No, see, you need to realise that you're the one that needs to change. The system isn't stacked against the working class. Your mind is stacked against itself. Have you ever heard of personal responsibility? For some people, this belief system is more palatable than having to consider that maybe the rich have rigged the game, that maybe we're all being cheated. You get to buy into the capitalism equals freedom lie, and freedom is the true victory of the light. And none of this is to say that positive thinking isn't important. I love a good affirmation as much as the next person, and it's not wacky or out there to say that if you're constantly thinking negatively about everything, then you might be miserable. The point I'm trying to make, probably not very succinctly considering how fucking long this video is that you can't positively think your way out of exploitation. You can't good vibe an end to racism or other forms of discrimination. And with all the will in the world, you can't magic away sickness and disease using just the power of the mind, no matter how much people like Guy Ballard or the Joe Dispensers of the world want you to think otherwise. This entire industry, going back to people like the Ballards, is a racket. It's designed to prey on people who are looking not only for spiritual salvation, but for some kind of meaning in their life. It's aimed at people who want more than working in a dead-end job for little to no pay, and who can blame them for wanting more? There has to be more. And that's the hole that people like Guy and Edna fill, telling you that all you need to do to achieve success, to rid yourself of illness, or to ascend to the next dimension, is to focus on yourself, the divine individual, and all the while their pockets get lined with cash and yours get a little bit lighter.
Don't tell me the moon is